There are many, good afternoon, everyone. There are many issues that are raised in the story of Korach and his rebellion against Moshe. Rashi points out one of them, that the Korach and his cohorts complained to Moshe that the Torah is not rational. Talit shekulo tchelis. The talit that is completely made of tchelet wool. Not just that it has one string that's tchelet. The entire talit is tchelet. The entire garment is tchelet. Tzarich l'tzitzit. You need tzitzit. So the rational explanation, rational response is no. I mean, the whole idea said by Tchelet to Risem also, Schartem is called Mitzvos Hashem. And here you have a beged, a garment that is completely Tchelet. So certainly everybody knows what it's about. And then Bayis Molei Smorit, a house that is full of holy texts. Tzorich l'mezuzah. Does it need a mezuzah on the door? So again, the rationality is that it does not. Because the whole idea of mezuzah is to remember that the Lord, so to speak, is in our house. That in our house we want to have a spiritual presence. And here it's a bayis oles for it, the house that's full of books of Torah and of spirit. So the mezuzah would be extraneous. So that's what they posed to Moshe. Now, if we examine it a little, throughout Jewish history, that there have been various streams of thought as to how to deal with the mitzvot. So there are those that advance what we call Talmei HaMitzvot. They give reasons for mitzvot. The Sefer HaChinuch, the Rambam himself, especially in the Moreh Nevuchim, there's a rational bent to the mitzvah. If there's a rational bent to the mitzvah, so then Korach says, and I have a question to ask. Isn't it irrational to ask that tzitzit be worn on a garment that is completely tchelet, or that a mezuzah is necessary in a house that is full of books, full of storage? So therefore, the irrationality of it is apparent. And Korach says basically that a faith, a religion that cannot be sustained rationally, something is wrong, Moshe. You didn't communicate it to us correctly. And in fact, you made it up, which is one of the side issues that Korach raised. In the Jewish world, over the ages, a debate has always raged over this question of Tamei HaMitzvot, whether mitzvahs are to be understood rationally, or whether we do a disservice to a mitzvah when we advance a reason for it, and the reason may appear valid, let's say in the 17th century, but in the 21st century, it's not valid at all. It doesn't fit into the reality anymore. And that was one of the great contentions of reform, for instance. In the 18th century and 19th century, when it gained such strong traction, it said, the dietary laws, the laws of kashrut, those were because of cleanliness, because they're harmful animals to eat, etc. But now that we in our modern world are aware of all of these things and we protect ourselves from it, so that there's no place for it. And they can all be avoided. I remember once in Miami, someone wanted to buy a hot dog, a hamburger or something. And he was going to buy it at a non-kosher eatery. And the man that was with him said, "Oh, it's not kosher, don't buy it here." And he answered him, he said, "What kosher?" He said, "It's under government inspection. The government guarantees that it's clean. So if it's under government inspection, then what's the problem?" I felt that to be ironic, because that was the same week that Rabbi Feinstein came out with his famous tshuva about Chol Yisrael, where he said, if the government says that it's cow milk, then it's cow milk, and you can rely on it. So again, it's a balance. Now the question is, Chol Yisrael, it's not a mitzvah, it's only a gzeira that Chazal made. They made it under certain circumstances. They didn't make it under the circumstances of government inspection, etc., etc. Also, once you're in the halachic process, there's a lot of things you can figure out. But people who are not in the halachic process, who somehow think there is no process, but just that the rabbis make it up, so there is no rational explanation that is. And therefore, if there's no rational explanation, Korach says, I don't want it, forget it. Telling me to wear tzitzit even though the talit is kula tchelet. It makes no sense whatsoever. At the other extreme, in Jewish life, there is an understanding that nothing is rational. And that, so to speak, the mitzvot that we are to perform have an effect, not even in this world, but in a different world. It's like, Niels Bohr's theory about quantum mechanics and physics, right? You can't see it, you can't measure it, but somehow it has an effect. It's very hard for us to wrap our mind around such a thing, but it does exist. It's been proven mathematically and experimentally. Einstein, when he heard it, said, "You mean the moon is not there unless I look at it?" And Bohr said, exactly right. The moon is not there unless you look at it. I always thought that was part of the background for Kiddush Levunim. By looking at it, we make it happen. So there is this completely irrational stream. So in the irrational world, it doesn't make a difference whether the talit is kula tchelet or not. Doesn't make any difference whether the bayit and mullahs for it or not. Still need a mezuzah because the mezuzah has powers that you are not aware of. And the main power is to fulfill what God told us to do. And especially in the 19th century in the Hasidic world, that became the prevalent way to look at mitzvahs. Asher kitshonu b'mitzvosov b'tzivonu. He commanded us to do it. Doesn't have to make sense to me. There are a lot of things in life that we do that we cannot rationally explain. But we know that it works, so therefore we do it. You don't have to understand every theory of electricity to turn on the light in your house. You just know that you pick up the switch and the light goes on. So that's mitzvahs as well. You don't have to know how mitzvahs work. You just have to have the faith that they do work. So in the contest between Korach and Moshe, there are these issues that are raised. And so it's not merely a contest of who's going to be the boss, who's going to be prime minister, who's in charge. At first glance, that's all that we would say that it is here. It's a personal vendetta of Korach and his Hassan Vaviram and the other group against Moshe. They don't like Moshe. They don't want to get rid of him no matter what. But the Medrash and the Talmud and the Meforshim develop it differently. That there are basic ideas involved here. Issues that were raised and that they don't go away and they're still here. We still face the idea of how do we look at the Torah? Do we look at it rationally or not? Do we search for Tamei HaMitzvot or is that fruitless? We should not be bothered by it. Just be satisfied in knowing what the mitzvah is and how to perform it correctly. And that's what we're bound to. Naturally, there's a lot of room in the middle here between the extremes, because if you want to deal with it rationally, you'll not be able to certainly get 100% of it. And if you want to deal with it irrationally also, it will leave the person wanting. It will leave the person empty. So this search goes on. Part of it is in the process of halacha, how we decide things, and in definition of mitzvah. And then the question arose, which is also part of the discussion: do you have a right? Did Chazal have a right to make mitzvot the Rabbanan? Where did that right come from? So again, Korach would say they had no such right. Moshe doesn't have. Moshe doesn't have that power. Sanhedrin and Moshe Tiken, the Gemara says already, Moshe already made takonis for Klal Yisrael. Read the Torah from Mincha because of Moshe. So all of this is in the balance. And when we look at the story of Korah, when we look at the disagreement, so there are many levels to look at it. And it's like an iceberg. Most of it is it's below the water. It's not what you see. And therefore, throughout the ages, the Meforshim have attempted to make it clear for us so that we would have a better understanding of what the issues are here. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash, Omer Rotzak Alivorchu, Zakot Israel, the two Chachir Lahem Torah, Mitzvot, Shenemar, and the Chafek, Saman, Sitkoi, Torah, Yandi.